What a gorgeous day. We got lucky today. This is absolutely wonderful. We really appreciate you being here with us. I joked around up here. You know, a lot of people come up here and they're sad that they didn't bring their golf club. Absolutely, we do not allow that here at the National Park, especially here on this battlefield. Alright. Looks like a fairway. Wouldn't look like a fairway back when the battle was taking place, though, right? Right. Now, we do know that the landscape might have been a little bit different. Kind of get you back in that mindset of 1814, what it would have looked like when Jackson and his troops came down from the north to hike 6 miles that morning, beginning about 6 a.m. to get to here. And they would have came here, they would have looked out in this field, and it would have been clear, but not this clear. It would have been clear because the Creek Indians, the Red Sticks, that had their village in the toe of the bend down there, Tohopeka or Tohoka, that village was built. They had log cabins, and they also built a barricade out of the trees that they had cut down in this area. So you all see that row of white posts out there. That delineates where they built a barricade, about 400 yards. And if you're looking this way, the river runs down there, goes around the toe of the bend, comes up back on this side. And they built that barricade from that side of the river all the way across. 5 to 8 feet tall, mostly made out of pine, chopped down from this area in front of the barricade. So when Jackson and his men would have arrived, would have been clear, they would have seen that barricade, but there would have been a lot of stumps, a lot of brush, so a little bit different. Now I mentioned the Red Sticks, or the Creek Indians that had their village here. Well, at that time, this was the end of the Creek War. And I think, back at the Visitor Center, I called it the Creek Civil War. And that's exactly what it was. In the beginning of the Civil War, you had two of the Creek Nation, the Muskogee Nation, fighting one another. Does anyone know why there were friction and fighting within the Creek Nation?
South Creek wanted more white.
This guy said the South Creek wanted more to be maybe a little bit more along in lines with the United States, right? Absolutely. We call it, so you can split up the creeks at that time geographically, and you can also split them up kind of mindset. So geographically, the upper creeks were located along the Coosa and the Tallapoosa River here in the state of now, Alabama. And then you had the lower creeks that had their villages and lived in along the Flint in Georgia. So yeah, you had kind of two different factions of the creek geographically. But more importantly, you had two different factions of the creek that were split on the perspective or the perception of the United States, these new frontiersmen and these new Europeans that were coming in and encroaching on their land, right? This was Creek Nation. This was their land. So you had the White Sticks, or the White Sticks, or the Loyalists, we call them. They sided with the United States. They traded with the United States. They were a little bit more open to assimilation of how the frontiersmen and how these new Europeans lived, how they divided land, and how they used agriculture. The Red Sticks, or the traditionalists, were more of the upper creeks. They did not want any part of these new frontiersmen, these new European settlers, the United States. They were more traditionalists. They liked their way of life. They liked how they were living. They liked their religion. They liked to keep their land. In fact, they began trading a little bit, but towards the end, in 1811, 1812, they just completely cut themselves off from the United States. The goods that they had traded for, plows, guns, some of them even just threw them away because they wanted to get back to that traditional way of life. So, you had these two factions of Creeks that were viewing the future in a little bit different way, and that's what caused the Creek Civil War, okay? So at that time, the United States really wasn't involved. They might have been a little bit of the cause, but they weren't picking up arms really at that time as a country. So does anyone know maybe a couple different reasons why the United States became involved in this Civil War? Anyone have any guesses? They were scared that they were going to join possibly some of our enemies at that time, right? The War of 1812. Who were we fighting? British. We were kind of...
Tecumseh come down and...
Yeah, so that's another reason. Yeah, so we were fighting the British, the War of 1812. We were a little fearful that the British might side with the Red Sticks, and the Red Sticks might side with the British, and make it a little bit more difficult to fight that War of 1812. Another reason, Tecumseh. Tecumseh came down in 1811. He wanted a unified front against the United States, and he was hoping to bring all the nations, American Indian nations, together to fight the United States. And the Red Sticks, some of those individuals were absolutely persuaded and joined Tecumseh's movement. Yeah. Anything else?
U.S. interest here.
Yeah.
Here.
Say that again?
Our settlers who were here.
Absolutely. So, I don't know how else to put it, but we were land hungry. We wanted to continue to expand west. Honestly, what better time to maybe try to be successful in getting more land and to expand west when you have a nation infighting each other? So yeah. Also, as you mentioned, European settlers, frontiersmen, were encroaching upon the Creek Nation land, right? In 1870, this is huge, in 1870, only about, I think 25,000 individuals were living in Tennessee, 25,000, maybe 30 were living in the state of Georgia. By 1810, right before that Creek Civil War and the Creek War, there was roughly 250,000 in Tennessee and 250,000 in Georgia. That is a huge, huge difference. Those individuals were still looking to expand. They were beginning to expand into the Creek Nation. They were building roads through the Creek Nation, the federal road, right? So all of this was playing a part in why the United States got involved with this. As people began encroaching upon the Creek Nation land and the Creek Nation, there were small skirmishes, right? Now, one big skirmish took place. The Fort Mims Massacre. Has anyone heard of that? Okay. So what really got the nation in a stir about the Creek Nation, when I said nation in the beginning, I meant the United States, across the country. What really got people's attention was the Fort Mims Massacre. And what happened was there was a fort, and some of the Red Stick faction attacked that fort, and they killed roughly about 250 individuals within that fort. Some of them were European, frontier, United States citizens, while others were some of the white sticks or the loyalists within the fort. And that news spread across the whole country. And it got to Nashville, Tennessee, and it got to Andrew Jackson, and he read about the Fort Mims Massacre, and he really wanted to get involved after that. So, Jackson, the Tennessee militia, they came down and began, they were the major players in the Creek War, okay, and especially here at this battle. Does anyone have any questions about some of the lead-up to this battle? Anything at all? Or anything that you'd like to add? So, March 27th, 1814. As I said, the decisive battle of the Creek War. Jackson marched 6 miles down here. He went and set up his 2 cannons on that little knoll. If you look at the barricade off to the right, that's called Gun Hill today. He set up 2 cannons there. He had his 39th Infantry of about 650 individuals, soldiers from the U.S. Army. They were about 125, 200 yards this way of the barricade. Then he had about 1,200, 1,300 Tennessee militia set up behind them and to the right here. He had a rear guard right here where we're kind of standing, making sure no one was attacking from the rear. He then sent about 1,000 individuals downstream, about 2 miles. They crossed the Tallapoosa River at a shoal, and they came up around, and they surrounded, on the south side of the river, the peninsula. Those 1,000 individuals, a lot of those people, again, were Tennessee militia, but there was also roughly 500 Cherokee allies, and also about 100 loyalists. Those white sticks are loyalists, right? All on the south side. The plan, Jackson's plan, was to use those cannons, knock down the barricade, have these roughly 2,000 individuals or soldiers charge, and basically win the battle. So, Jackson sets up his cannons. At 10:30, he starts shooting that barricade. 2 hours later, that barricade's still standing. His plan really didn't work. But, on the south side, there were those Cherokee allies I was telling you about. A number of those individuals had the idea to swim across the river, which was about 120 yards wide at the time, flowing fast. It was March, right? Rain. It's spring. They swam across that river, grabbed a few of the canoes that were tied up on the right next to the village there, and they brought them across, all being fired at, and they started ferrying their Cherokee brothers across. So they had now an attack from the rear. They attacked the village of Tohoka, mostly where the women and children were at. They started burning some of the log cabins. Smoke started rising. Gunshots were heard. Jackson's up here, and he sees that smoke, and he hears those gunfire, and he knows that somehow they had crossed that river and managed to get across. And that's when Jackson made the long roll of the drum. Not himself, he had a drummer. That signaled to charge. So now you have 2,000 men here. Maybe about 100 on the south side. Around the south side of the river, another 900 or 1,000. You're talking about 3,300 fighting men, soldiers. Inside the barricade, the Red Sticks numbered roughly 1,000. So, Jackson, 3-1 in favor. Every single one of those individuals on Jackson's side, they had guns. Muskets, some had rifles. Good, latest technology, most of them. The Red Sticks, only about a third of those individuals had guns. Most of those were Indian trade muskets. Not the greatest technology. Kind of to wrap it up, Jackson and his soldiers defeated the Red Sticks. The battle went through the night. When darkness came, kind of slowed down a little bit. When all was said and done, this kind of puts it in perspective a little bit. Jackson and the individuals that are fighting with him, roughly about maybe 45 or 50 casualties. The Red Sticks right around, we think, maybe 700 or 800. Very few of the warriors on the Red Stick side survived or escaped. A number of them did, but very few. The women and children, most of them were taken prisoner of war. Some of those individuals were given to the Loyalists that helped out, maybe some of the Cherokee allies. A lot of them, we don't know what happened. So after this, this kind of broke the Red Sticks. A few months later, the Creek Nation, they signed a treaty ceding about 22 million acres of their land to the United States. And that 22 million acres is now what? About half, roughly, of the state of Alabama, and about 2/5, I believe, of Georgia. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Anything at all? Anything that you're curious about?
Sam Houston was here too, right?
Absolutely. So Sam Houston, he was part of the 39th Infantry. He fought here. He charged the barricade. He was wounded a couple times. Survived. Of course. Went on to the Republic of Texas, I believe.
Yes, that's correct.
Absolutely.
Leave here after the mountains, move on west.
That's a great question. When they ceded that 22 million acres, believe it or not, this portion of Alabama that we now call Alabama, the battlefield, that stayed with the Creek Nation. So even though they lost the battle here, that 21 million acres that they ceded, this was not a part of it. And so they remained here. They remained here until the early 1830s. And then, at that time, a man by the name of Jackson, I think we've mentioned his name a little bit today, he was president, and what took place was the Indian Removal Act. And the Indian Removal Act forced all the Native Americans living east of the Mississippi still, they forced them to move west of the Mississippi. Trail of Tears, absolutely. And so, most of the Creek Indians that lived in this area, up until the early 1830s, they were then, I think 1834 or 35, they were then forced to move out west to Oklahoma. Now, one of the things I always like to say is that the Creek Nation, the Red Sticks, were defeated here on March 27th, 1814. But the Creek Nation was not defeated, by no means. The Muskogee, or Creek Nation, is alive today and well out in Okmulgee, Oklahoma. That's where the majority of them were forced to relocate to. And today, about 84,000 Creek, Muskogee ancestors live out there. So, still alive and well. Absolutely. Does anyone have any other questions at all?
Is there a roster that tells us the militia that fought here?
Yes, sir. So the question was, is there a roster of the people who fought here? Yes. We have rosters of the 39th Infantry. We have rosters of the Cherokee Allies. We have rosters of a lot of the Tennessee militia that fought here as well. And so if you're interested, if you think that you might have ancestors that maybe fought here, see me sometime today, and we'll take a look at those. All right? I appreciate that question.
I heard where the Cherokee chief that was so helpful to Jackson appealed to him after the war not to be removed, and Jackson wouldn't do it. That's kind of
So,
I think even the Creeks who were
are you good?
who fought with Jackson, they had their land taken from them too at the Treaty of Fort Jackson. With all the creeks, the Allies and Indians.
That's not right.
So yeah, so I don't really know that story too well.
I do know that one, but that is true.
Okay, yeah, but I would like to just ask, Chris, do you mind? Chris Panic is a really good friend of mine, and he is part of the Eastern Band of Cherokee, and he joined us today. And first off, nice to see you again. And I am by no means an expert on this stuff, and having Chris to kind of lean on when he's here is awesome, and I appreciate that. So your question or your statement, so there was a Cherokee chief that allied with Jackson.
Right.
And could you talk a little bit about that chief or your knowledge of that at all?
Sub-chiefs, what we refer to as headmen, so leaders of our community. We had chiefs that were chiefs spiritually speaking, with our faith, our beliefs. Then we had chiefs that governed. A chief is kind of it's a hard thing for people to grasp. In our culture, we're a matrilineal society. The women control our communities, our people, until certain periods of time, when, in this instance, a war chief takes over. So you have to understand the removal. The removal, Trail of Tears, is what most people know. Trail of Tears, the removal, actual forced removal, was 1835 to 1839. Those were the forced removals by the Indian removal act. Andrew Jackson, before he came here and was made famous, he allied with us. A lot of people speculate that Andrew Jackson came from the state of South Carolina. But the origins of Andrew Jackson as a person is still somewhat speculated. But he came with us. He was accepted by us. And I say us, my people. At the time, before this, my nation was involved in the encroachment of the intruders that came through the East Coast. South Carolina, your ports up north, those types of places. The port of entry for most to involve us was Charleston, South Carolina. They came up through South Carolina. South Carolina was ours, but it wasn't our communities. It was a transient spot, a hunting spot. So as the encroachment came, we battled. And the French were here before the British. If you go back through history, people kind of get that tunnel vision. History goes this way. Our minds are locked in tunnel vision sometimes this. But in regards to your question, chiefs, we had chiefs for those communities in South Carolina. The encroachment came, those chiefs were either decimated at those townships, those communities, if you will, or lower towns, things like that. We progressed back. So we were allied with the French at one time, but we knew the brutality of the French. We said, hey, we don't want that. So we decided, hey, we're going to ally with the British, where that we took an opportunity. We saw an opportunity. So we allied ourselves with them to defeat who we knew were our enemies. Does that make sense? It came back to focus. But there were chiefs here. Anybody's, one of the questions was, is there a roster? We call it a muster roll. There are muster rolls. It's not in my lane. I'm a military guy, so I'll say that. It's not in my lane to worry about the other guys. That's collateral to me. What's in my lane is my people. I have muster rolls. A lot of people would hear the name Sequoia. His name was George Guess in the English version. He fought here as well. One of my grandfathers, you have to understand about me, the turn of the century is when the non-native came into my blood. So before that, I was full blood, maternal and paternal. So different maternal and paternal grandfathers fought here. So we had chiefs. Chief is kind of it's a hard thing to explain. It's not like the president. We had different people acting in different. It's kind of like the military. At the time, if you have a private, you have another private, but he's 6 months senior to that private. Well, now guess what? You're the chief. Follow me. So it's hard. Well, yes, there were chiefs here. Headman. My grandfather was chief. He was headman. A lot of people don't know about different chiefs within our people, but yes, they fall here. My grandfather was a headman. He was a chief. He was wounded here. And if you look at the roster, it says dangerously. So yes, there were chiefs here. And I want to tell you this, if I may. I don't mean to take your time.
You're good.
I'm here. I try to stay in the back.
Yes, sorry.
And for me, it's every time, bro. This is history for some people, for you people. But for me, we have this thing called generational trauma. Every time I come here, I'm a soldier. I was on the honor guard. I was presidential honor guard at Arlington. And my people, this is Arlington. Makes sense? But I'm on Muskogee land. This is their land. Well, I usually do this before I say anything. I honor those Muskogee warriors because I'm an intruder in their nation. So I'd like to honor those, especially their brave warriors who fought a brave and mighty fight for their people. A warrior doesn't fight for anything other than his people and his nation. I want to honor those people. If you like anything that I have, and I apologize to you, I don't mean to get emotional. If I can help in any way, I brought stuff. If y'all were interested in the Cherokee end of it, get with me. I'll show you those muster rolls. I'll show you and I'll give you whatever information I have. There's certain things that I can't tell you, will not tell you, because it's not for you. But in so much as I can, I don't withhold anything. Yeah? And I appreciate everybody.
Chris, thank you very much. Thank you.